Cannabis Quick Hits.
Just to jump back to kind of some terpene talk for just a moment, I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether you feel that it's becoming a more common trend that people are adding terpenes either to concentrates, maybe even trying to infuse flour that is maybe a bit less than ideal in its terpene content with external terpenes. Do you feel like this is deleterious, advantageous, and do you feel like there's any benefit? Because there's a lot of discussion around, oh, it's non-cannabis derived terpenes and that's inferior to cannabis derived terpenes. But the inner chemist in me thinks myrcene's myrcene, man. Like, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, same. I will just bring it back to water. I mean, you can make water in a lab by combining hydrogen and oxygen, or you can take sewer water and distill out pure water, right? Which one would you rather drink? The truth is if you purify them both, they're both just water, right? It's the same thing, no matter what the source is. So to me, water is water is water. It's what's it contaminated with? And that's the question. There's two questions. A, is it contaminated? Okay, so we're getting myrcene from a different plant. That's fine. Are we co-extracting anything else with the myrcene? So what are the contaminants in that bottle of myrcene that you're buying to dump on your flour or add to your concentrates? That's the question. So what's the contaminant? What's the levels of those contaminants? And what's the health consequences of those contaminants? Because plants make compounds that are poisonous to humans. It's right. That's what they do. They try to defend themselves from us, and from any plant that's a herbivorous, someone that's a plant or an animal that's attacking a plant. So these defense compounds can actually be bad for you. So maybe we're going into some, call it some weird lemongrass or something like that to try and find some terpenes to put into our cannabis. The potential is there that if there were a secondary metabolite produced by the plant that was poisonous to humans, that we co-extract it, and now that's in with the myrcene, right? And then that myrcene enters that contaminated myrcene enters the supply chain. Well, that could be a problem. The other thing that could be a problem is when we consume cannabis, there's natural physiological levels of these chemicals that the plant can produce. And the last 30, 40 years of science seems to show that there's no deleterious effect on human health by using those. But it could be if we start making, it might, a lot of these limonene, terpinolene, pinene, a lot of these terpenes, as you were saying earlier, they're solvents, right? They can dissolve cannabinoids, but they can actually also dissolve like certain types of plastic or rubber. Sam Skunkman was telling me a story about they had this haze plant that they used to harvest in California, I believe it was, and they had these rubber rings that sat on the top of the jars when they would close off, and the rubber would seal in the jar. But if you left them in there for 3 or 4 months, the terps would actually dissolve away the rubber. So there's a potential issue with all these plastics that we're using to hold cannabis, especially the cheaper stuff. And again, in a non-regulated market, nobody's paying attention to these things. And they could have potential health consequences. For example, if you're making high terp dabs and you're putting them in these plastic containers, you can actually see sometimes when you clean out the container that the plastic has started to melt. And did that plastic then melt into the dabs? Right? Are you now consuming these things? So there's a lot of health issues that I think we have to really keep at the forefront of our planning as we go about creating regulated markets all over the world. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it, but it just means that we should have some kind of thought and really careful due diligence before just doing whatever we want, as if the way that we have done things in the black market have been the right way to do things, right? We've done them out of necessity, typically for the past 50 years. But we might learn, and we are learning with some of the chemicals that we spray on the plant, that these things stick around, right? The story used to be, if you're a veg, don't worry about it. You can spray on the plant. That's not going to end up in the flour. But shit, we started doing the testing, and it's like, you know what? It all ends up in the flour, right? So a lot of the practices that we've had in black markets, they're not going to be the practices that we use in regulated markets. and that's okay, right? It's all about advancing our understanding and creating a safe industry where people can use cannabis in, as you know, like you said, from a harm reduction point of view, it's as safe as it can be.
Yeah, words of wisdom right there. And